News Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU Heritage Series. It's a one-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series. From News Talk 1400 KFRU.
Thanks for joining us again on the Heritage Show on News Talk 1400 KFRU. Today we're going to introduce you to a longtime Boone County resident, and we're going to learn more about him through our conversation today. Carl Niewaner is our guest. It's nice to meet you. How are you?
Thank you very much. Fine.
You have lived in Boone County for how long?
I went to school here in 1946. I came up here on a GI Bill, and my home was the Blue Campus at that time, where they moved the barracks up from Fort Leonard Wood.
Now, where's the Blue Campus?
The Blue Campus was where the University Hospital is. They put these barracks on the old golf course, and they moved these barracks up here, and that was quite an experience living in these things.
So you lived, that's called the Blue Campus, and it was where the hospital is now?
Yes.
What was the golf course? Was there a golf course there too, or are you talking about a different golf course? They moved it from the golf course.
No, we didn't. The university didn't have a golf course until they built the Gustain course.
So what was that like living in that area there?
Well, let me explain exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Like I say, it was a barracks. They were quite long. There were 2 sleeping rooms on each side, and in each room were 2 bunks and 4 fellows, and a study room with 1 table and 1 lamp. There were a total of 4, 2 on each side. It was 16 men, and the restroom was in the middle. Our first heating appliance was a coal-burning pot-belly stove, and they left the coal in buckets out on the front porch.
Oh.
Now, these buildings were not insulated. They were just real thin walls, had no insulation on the floors. The bathroom wasn't heated, and it got very cold that winter, and so we wound up sleeping many, many nights in our clothes. And the way we solved the study situation, the typical military way, we stood watch over the coal stove.
Okay.
In either 2 or 4 hours, it depended at times, so that we kept that coal stove going all night, plus the fact we had room to study. I mean, 8 people couldn't study around one little table with 1 lamp. And it got so cold that we, 100 and some odd of us, went to Jesse Hall with blankets and rolled up and slept on the floor. That was picked up by the St. Louis Globe-Democrat at the time. And so they took the coal stoves out and they put in coal oil stoves. And they left a jug of coal oil on the front porch. What big problem. It was a big improvement, except one big problem. If you didn't clean the flue on these things, they blew up, and that greasy soot would go all clothes.
So that was for 1 year? That was for your first year of study
here? First 2 semesters. Our eating facilities were at Crowder Hall.
I was going to ask about where those were. Now, Crowder Hall, now that still exists.
It's still here.
Is that the ROTC building?
That's right. And we had to line up outside because there wasn't any room inside to wait. There was room to eat, but not to wait. So here we are in the wintertime, snowing, standing out there waiting. We had breakfast there. In other words, you eat breakfast, go to class, come back for lunch, go to class, come back for supper. And so we made many trips back and forth.
Yeah. How long did that Blue Campus last?
It was there the whole time I was there, I think.
Yeah.
My brother got discharged from the Army after I got out. So I waited for him, and we finally managed to. We're lucky enough to pledge a fraternity, and so for the next 2 years that we lived in the fraternity house.
I'm interested in the area there because if the hospital wasn't there, Stadium Boulevard wouldn't have been there. But the football field by that time had moved from where it used to be, which is now I think Stankowski Field, over to Memorial Stadium, I believe by then.
No, well, Memorial Stadium was there.
Yeah,
was already there. We used to have a football field there that we had played intramural football in.
Was the Veterans Hospital wasn't there?
Oh, no. no.
So was that just empty?
It was empty.
And so they found the spot then. And these were, you'd call them barracks, and you described them well, but these were not the Quonset hut types thing.
No, these are regular wood-framed barracks with real thin walls. We in the springtime we were out playing catch, and one fellow actually threw a baseball and it stuck in a wall. Just Celotex type stuff, you know.
Now, where were you from originally before you came to school here and before you went to the service?
I was born and raised in Kirkwood.
Okay.
And I lived through the Depression and saw the best and the worst of it by far. My father was out of work for over 3 years. And
how'd the family make it during that time?
Well, being very resourceful, my mother and father were both immigrants. Our whole yard in Kirkwood was planted either in fruit trees or in garden. And we had rabbits, chickens, goats, pigeons, and did a lot of fishing. And in those days, we didn't have freezers or anything like that. So if we caught a nice big mess of catfish, actually, my father put them in a bathtub to keep them alive.
Oh, my gosh.
So
did neighbors then buy from you, or were you just self-sufficient?
Everyone was in the same shape, David.
I see.
There just wasn't any work. I mean, and most people were just too proud to even go to relief and ask for. They just wouldn't do it.
So basically it was self-sufficiency.
We're self-sufficient. We were. We spent practically the whole summer of 1934 and 1936 in the basement because it was so hot. We didn't even have a fan in the house. That was a learning experience.
Where did your parents immigrate from?
From Germany. My father was in World War I. He was wounded on the Russian front and also wounded at Verdun in France. And he said that things got so bad over in Germany after the war, as history shows, that they were even eating cats and dogs and things. And he said he could tell that there was going to be another war. And so he and virtually his entire family came over here to the United States.
What was their reaction to then World War II when the Germans, you know how the country felt about the Germans.
Those were difficult times for them, I imagine. I know it was difficult times for my brother and myself. We did take abuse and discriminated against, no doubt about that. Not to the degree of some people are, but what they did. Up until the time that my brother and I both went into service. But I remember they had a Bundles for Britain program where they were giving money to and clothing to Britain, and my dad said, as you send money over there, he said, those people are going to bomb my mom and dad. And you think about that. We've never lived through anything like that.
No, we have not. And
so and at that time, between 1939 and 1941, the country was pretty well divided, 50-50. It was pretty close.
About whether to get into the war or
get
not
into
get into the war.
Who to support.
Yeah.
I mean, it was there were commentators on the radio. Some of them I recall listening to Father Coughlin was really anti-war, and he leaned towards Germany.
Just a few days ago, I interviewed a man who has written a book about Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of the Kennedys,
right.
And there were many times where it was unclear how he did not want involvement. He wanted isolation, and then also I think he felt like he had a solution to keep war from happening, and he was not portrayed as portraying the Germans as the bad people that many people did. So that gives us a better context for that. Karl Niewander is my guest. Now, your last name, for those who would know German, they would see that that's quite German. What does that translate to mean?
Oh, to live near, roughly.
To live near.
Yes.
Let's come back to Columbia, where you came on the GI Bill after being. How long did you serve in the service?
Almost 3.5 years.
And was that you were part of that was in the Pacific?
Yes.
So what was that like?
It was strictly on patrol duty, mainly anti-submarine warfare. I trained for anti-submarine warfare. It's a long story how I got to midshipman school, but I graduated from Columbia University Midshipman School, and was then assigned to subchaser training school in Miami. And by the luck of the draw, my grades were pretty good, too good, I imagine. I was sent to sonar school to train in sonar. And strictly that I was a radar sonar officer to begin with. So I fit in with patrol duty.
So you went patrol duty, South Pacific,
well,
looking for submarines?
Western South, frontier, yes. Well, no, patrol and escort, yes, sound good, looking for submarines. The Japanese submarines were fairly elusive. In 1940, December 25th, 1943, our sister ship and two other PCs were escorting two escort carriers into San Diego, and they're only a mile offshore. And one of the PCs had contact with...
What's a PC?
Patrol craft.
All right.
There was a subchaser, a steel-hulled subchaser, 173 feet long. And the three PCs dropped 49 depth charges. The sub came up bow first, and a plane from North Island, a Navy plane from North Island, dropped a depth charge and sank it. There wasn't, unfortunately, there wasn't any photographs taken, and there wasn't any debris left for some reason. But the Japanese, after the war, affirmed that the sub was sunk off the coast of California.
A mile off of San Diego.
Well, right before that, I should say, a Japanese submarine shelled Santa Barbara, California. Lobbed a few shells in there. Didn't cause much damage, but it woke people up.
I'm sure that did.
It's interesting, even on his anti-submarine warfare, that the Germans and the Japanese had exactly opposite objectives. The Germans were determined to sink merchant ships and supply ships to supply England and Russia, because, as Churchill said, the war in Europe will be decided in the Battle of the Atlantic. And so over a period of the war, the U-boats sank 2,882 Allied merchant ships, along with 175 of our warships, Allied warships. We sank, by the time of the end of the war, 779 submarine U-boats. The Japanese philosophy was not to waste a torpedo on anything smaller than a cruiser. So if you look at the records, you see that, Indianapolis was a cruiser, and there's still an argument whether a torpedo sank that or whether a human torpedo sank it, a suicide. Yeah. But so they stayed away from our merchant ships. And it's interesting because they use their submarines for moving troops and supplies. And they built four that actually had airplanes on them, specially designed airplanes on a hangar. And their intent was to bomb the Panama Canal. But we had when we started the war, when we got into it, we had 11 ships on the whole Gulf Coast that were anywhere near capable of dealing with submarines. That's all. Now, to give you some idea of what finally happened, we built 361 of these PCs. Each one of these PCs had 65 men and 6 officers, 18 different rates. In other words, to train all these people.
Okay.
We had over 500 the normal subchaser, which is a smaller wooden hull thing, at the end of the war. It shows you how fast this country mobilized.
Yeah.
And got together and got the job done. When I first went to New Jersey as a stopping point there, we could still see ships burning at night. You see the glow on the horizon, and you'd walk along the beach at Asbury Park, and you see debris that was washed ashore from the ships. And as you walked along the sand, you couldn't see it, but if you step in the sand and made a print, the oil would fill that print. In other words, the oil from all these ships that were sunk was washing ashore.
And so those are ships that were sunk off the Atlantic coast.
Oh, yes.
Carl Niewander is our guest. We're going to take a break in just a moment. I'm curious as to, you talked about the long story of becoming a midshipman, or can you fill in a little bit of that? You've made that sound like there's a rather interesting story that goes along with you winding up where you wound up.
Well, in early spring of 1943, I was a senior in high school, and 6 of us fellows decided to go down to the Federal Building in St. Louis and enlist in the Marine Corps.
In the Marines.
Yeah. I passed the physical, and everything was A-OK, except I was 17 years old. One other fellow in the group was 17. The other 4 were 18. You were eligible for the draft when you were 18. So in order to have some say of what organization you're going to be in, a lot of fellows volunteered.
Before the draft.
Yeah. Before the draft.
Yep.
So I took the papers home. My mother wouldn't sign them. Well, so I talked to her about it and finally convinced her that entering a service would be better than waiting for the draft. And I said, how about the Navy? And she said, fine. So shortly later I went down and joined the Navy. I think the office was right next to them in the Federal Building.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, a short time later I got a letter in the mail saying that the Navy was offering tests to take, that they were for midshipman school training. And I thought, well, okay, I'll take the test. I didn't know a thing about it, to be very honest about it. My grades were, I made the honor roll, but just barely. I mean, a little better than the 3.0 average. So I took the test, and a couple of days later here, I passed it.
And you were still 17.
Yes, I was still 17. Mm-hmm. So I had to get, they had envelopes in there, and I had to get 3 recommendations. So I went to the minister of our church, I went to our family doctor who had delivered me, and I went to my football coach. So evidently they did okay.
3 good things.
Because I got in, and then I found out later that I was also investigated by the FBI.
Because of your family background?
No, because we would be dealing with secret and top secret work from then on, which I did with the communications and so forth. Mm-hmm. But with some schooling and preschooling, I wound up at Columbia University Midshipman School.
I see. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and we'll continue our visit, including asking our guest about his relationship with Mort Walker, also asking about the time that he also represented a district in Jefferson City. Carl Niewander is our guest. This is the Heritage Show on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400, KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
We hope you're enjoying the Heritage Show again today. We trust that you are. We're learning about Carl Niewander and stories that he has told about growing up in Kirkwood, Missouri during the Depression, but then also coming and on the GI Bill, coming to the University of Missouri right after getting discharged from the Navy and serving in World War II. He's talked about some of the experiences on the patrol carriers and looking for submarines and going to midshipman school. He has lived in Boone County pretty much ever since coming here to school. Is that correct?
No, I graduated in 1949 with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. And I worked for a short time in St. Louis for Laclede Steel Company. And then they selected me to be the chief engineer for their fabricating warehouse in New Orleans.
I see.
So I lived in New Orleans for almost 5 years.
What brought did you come back to Columbia or mid-Missouri after that?
I had a little problem down there. The company, I found out, was fixing prices and collusion on bidding and things like that, and I just couldn't take that. I quit. And lo and behold, About a week after I quit, I got an offer to interview for a management job in Oklahoma, a 1-year contract to be the mediator, more or less, between Oklahomans and the people who were managing from Long Island. And it was just like trying to mix oil and water, as I turned out. But my feelings about the company were correct, because a few years later, Senator KFRU investigated a company and essentially broke it because they were guilty of price fixing. So then, by sheer coincidence, I looked in the paper one day at Post-Dispatch, which we read regularly on the weekends, and there was an ad in there that a structural steel fabricating plant in central Missouri was looking for a general manager. And no other specifics, but they gave a box number, and I answered the box number, and a short time later I got a call from Columbia here, and it was Harold Reback. And I managed, came up, and we moved to Columbia because I just tickled pink to get back to a smaller community out of New Orleans. I worked in St. Louis, and we loved it in Oklahoma, but there again, that company went under finally on strike because they couldn't get along. I mean, they just unfortunately.
You told we on our first segment we covered a lot of the military, but there's one story that you had. It's interesting the way you came to tie something that was printed in a recent Reader's Digest to your own experience. You were telling me that before we started the program. I think that's fascinating, because I bet just to keep your eyes open and then all of a sudden read something and say, this clicks. Guess what? I think I just remember this.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it, David. I volunteer at the Veterans Hospital escorting patients. And in between runs, we read magazines to keep busy and so forth. And so I was reading a magazine just a few months ago, the July-August issue of Reader's Digest. When I left St. Louis on train to go to New York, eventually to wind up in New Jersey at Asbury Park, I boarded a train as an individual, it was a troop train, but I was traveling by myself. So traveling by myself, there were no facilities aboard that train for eating. So you had, every time you stopped someplace, you'd hope to get something, but it was difficult even to buy something because everything was rationed. Mm-hmm. And even candy bars, you couldn't buy these things. So I don't know what time it was. It must have been 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and I looked out and I saw this railroad station with the lights around the eaves. And I remember it just like it happened yesterday. This is back 1944.
Yeah.
And reading the magazine, all of a sudden, I come to page 147, and the soldiers call our town Dreamville. And it talks about these. What happened was the train stopped, and these young ladies came aboard, and I believe they were probably high school girls, and each one was carrying a box, cardboard box. And this girl came up to me, and she gave me this box, and we spoke a little bit. She asked me where I was from, and we talked a little bit. And in this box, she had a ham and cheese sandwich on rye bread with lettuce. I remember this as plain as can be.
You do have the specifics.
I had and the chocolate cake was sort of a yellow chocolate cake with black frosting chocolate frosting on it, and an apple. Now, what struck me, not only them giving the food, but the fact is that the cheese was rationed, the meat was rationed, and the sugar was rationed to bake that cake. So these families were giving out of the meager things that they had to help the military people. And it talks about in here of all the soldiers that they stopped. And each person traveling on that train got a box like that. You can imagine the number that went through. I have no idea. I mean, it doesn't say in the article how many they served, but I don't think they even know. But it just struck me, and I've never forgotten that act of kindness, because it made you feel, so good that somebody really cared.
Yeah. And the article in the Reader's Digest says it became known as Dreamsville, but it was Denison, Ohio.
Denison, Ohio, right.
And it just clicked. You said, that's it.
Well, I wrote the girl.
Yeah.
Her name and address. Well, we wrote back and forth a few times, but then, like everything else, somewhere along the line, somebody dropped the ball.
Sure.
You know, I wish I would have kept going.
Yeah.
But I
Isn't that
didn't.
something though? Different times at that point. I mean, it's just the country was different then, wasn't it?
Well, that's what strikes me so much right now, David, is that everybody felt that war. I mean, everybody. You had to scrimp and save. The people back home. My mother wouldn't even use all her ration coupons. They saved tin. They saved metal. They saved aluminum. They saved grease. We were allowed one pair of shoes a year. You couldn't hardly buy tires, and those you bought you had to get them retreaded. I think I may be wrong on this, but I think my dad got 3 gallons of gasoline a week. I think there was a C card, I think, whatever they called it.
Yeah.
B card got more, and A card got more. I forget exactly what it was. But I used to get. I had a 30-day rehabilitation leave, and they gave me some ration coupons to take home, and my mother wouldn't even use them.
She thought if she didn't use them, they would be there for someone else, a more important perhaps use, or that didn't want to use up things that she didn't need to use.
Honest to goodness, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure other fellows feel the same way, that I ate better in the Navy than I did at home because, of course, we were just coming out of the Depression then, and just getting back on our feet. And but the food. The basic food was going to your armed services. Mm-hmm. And another thing that struck me then as compared to now is that when I went in the Navy, the minimum wage was 30 cents an hour. And the government started building these munition plants, small arms plants they call them, and they paid the astronomical amount of $1 an hour. And $1.25 in some way.
That'd be a good job.
That was a good job then.
That would be a really good job.
You're right. I remember when the minimum wage was raised from 25 cents to 30 cents. And that's a big raise when you think about it, percentage-wise.
It is. It's a 20% raise.
But, today, I've said it before. I mean, publicly, that the only people who really felt the Iraq War or the Afghan War are the men and women over there and their families.
Their families, yep, exactly.
And it's heart-wrenching when I think about it. I know how my mother felt with 2 in the service. You never know what's going to happen.
Right. Carl Niewander is our guest. Well, let's talk about another connection that you had, and I would guess that this came when you came to Columbia. You have told me that you knew Mort Walker. You hung out at the shack.
Well, I was fortunate enough that I was free almost every Friday afternoon. And being in engineering school, you did have to study quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'm very honest about it. And but Friday afternoon, that was our start. I mean, that we could take life easy a little bit. And so every Friday afternoon, we'd reconvene our classes over at the shack. And Mort would always have a table there, and he'd have a whole entourage around him because he was editor of the Show Me magazine then. Or not editor. He was maybe he was, but he was a cartoonist.
Uh-huh.
And we just shoot the bull. The interesting thing is, nobody ever talked about their service in the Army or Navy.
Really?
No, never.
Well, these were all service people. These
Yes.
are people who had come on the GI
Yes,
Bill.
Mort was in the Army. Yeah, I found out later.
So what'd you talk about? Girls.
Yeah, quite a bit, really. Just having a good time. I mean, we had a real good time. Big reliefs because, like I say, most of us had to study hard. To give you an idea, I think there were 35 in my civil engineering class when I started. There were 35 when I ended.
Wow.
And I believe, I may be wrong on this, but I believe only 2 were civilians. The rest of them were all veterans.
Yeah.
And so we came to school here with the idea, by golly, of getting an education. I know I had most of my electives taken care of, and but I filled out my curriculum each semester with 20, 21 hours because I figured that if the government was paying for it, that I was going to take advantage of it. Yeah, incidentally, the total cost of the government of my education was less than $3,000.
Oh, wow. The total cost.
Total cost. That included $75 a month stipend that they gave.
Also, $75 and
well, David, there wasn't any tuition then.
Yeah.
All they paid for was the books.
I suppose that books have increased in price just a bit from that time.
Oh my
also.
gosh! I look at my granddaughters. I've had 2 granddaughters graduated up here.
So Mort Walker and the shack, did it seem new at that point in time, or was it old?
No, it seemed old.
It seems like that would be a place that when it was first built, it probably felt old.
I remember Vern Blakemore and his wife Mary ran it.
And was it loud? Was it had a great smell?
It was a smell, all right. Beer smell and cigarette. Everybody was smoking.
Yeah.
Then, and it was.
Did it feel packed in?
Oh yes, it was packed.
And so he had his table.
Basically. And most people carved their initials on the table or some little things.
Sure.
All the woodwork was all carved up.
What'd you like to eat there? Hamburgers?
Hamburgers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your name also is on where outside of the Alumni Center now is the statue for Beetle Bailey in tribute of Mort Walker, and it's got a table there, and there's carvings on it. It's not a wood table. I don't know what the metal is, but your name is right there. As you said, it's right near the knife that is near Beetle Bailey's hand and his mug.
It's a bronze table, and I've forgotten how much each one of those sections cost. In other words, they sent out a notice to all the alumni, and I've forgotten how much it was, but mine's on there.
Yeah. Morton Walker, was he a nice guy? Was this a guy that liked to entertain people?
Just a super guy, just like his cartoons go, and just a real regular guy, super. He was stationed in Italy, incidentally, during the war.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back. We'll continue our visit. We have one more segment to go, and want to talk about the time that our guest served in the State House in Jefferson City, a couple of terms there in the 60s. It'd be interesting to get his comparison of that time to the time now. So stay with us. You're listening to The Heritage Show, and you're listening to it on News Talk 1400 KFRU. We'll return with our guest, Carl Niewander, in a moment on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
We continue our visit with Carl Niewander, our guest on the Heritage Show on News Talk 1400 KFRU. He served in Jefferson City for 2 terms. Let's talk about that for a few moments in our final segment, and then we'll be able to I've got a couple of more questions that I'd like to ask you about your life now. So when were you serving in Jefferson City?
I ran for office in 1964.
And why did you run?
It's interesting. I had been involved in political campaigns beginning in 1948.
Really?
We stayed up all night in 1948, and Truman got elected in the morning.
So what were you doing in 1948 all night for Truman?
I was in a fraternity house listening to the radio.
Yeah?
And that was our form of communication.
That's good. We still like that. We hope people still do that once in a while.
And
but you would have been on radio. Were they doing what the newspapers ended up doing and saying, you know what, this is all over, folks?
Oh yes. Harry was losing all along, but we were having a little party too. I should say that election night party, and lo and behold, he won.
Had you campaigned for him then?
No, not really. They had what they call veterans for Truman, but it wasn't very active. Matter of fact, I don't know what they did.
So you just listened to the radio and having what fraternities do. You're just hanging out all night.
And after I graduated here, I took a fairly active part in Stevenson's campaign in New Orleans in 1952. And then again in 56. And I took a very active campaign with Jack Kennedy in
would have been 59 and 60 when he was running.
1960.
Yeah.
And his his death really affected me. It affected the whole nation, really, staggering. And I don't know. I just got felt like maybe I'd like to run.
What was campaigning for Kennedy like?
It was hard here in Missouri because there was some prejudice being a Catholic. No doubt about it. I mean, there was very, very strong feelings. And
what kind of campaigning did you do? Door-to-door type stuff, or mail-out flying?
Mainly in the headquarters.
Yeah.
Just getting signs ready and nailing things in, doing the.
Was that in Columbia here?
Yes.
Where was that headquarters?
Oh, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. That's all right.
It was on Broadway and at a corner of the building's not there anymore. Corner of 8th and Broadway.
Where were you when you heard that the assassination had occurred?
I was in St. Louis at a meeting, I believe, of the Scottish Rite, I think, in St. Louis, and I heard that, and it just, the whole place just you couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
You just couldn't believe it, and came back home and gee, everybody was crying.
Yeah. I was in third grade, and I had a teacher who came into the room after getting called to the hallway, and she was crying. I got home, and my mom was that way, and so it touched everybody, like you said.
He was a charismatic fellow. He was an inspiring fellow. He could lift you up.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was in the Navy too, and had a young man that really didn't have to do what he did, but he felt he should.
So then in 1964, you decided to run, is that right?
Yes.
What you said. What were issues at that point in time?
They're really, here it would be education, primarily. We didn't have the divisions that you have now. In other words, I served just 2 terms, but it was the first term of Warren Hearns.
Huh.
And we, of course, had a balanced budget, no doubt about it. As I recall, we fully funded the foundation plan for schools. We built the Hearn Center was built, the livestock pavilion was built. Things were going well. Highway construction was going on.
We didn't have as many representatives whose part of their district touched Columbia at that time, I would guess.
Well, I was one of those that served before reapportionment and after reapportionment.
Mm.
The one man, one vote came into effect. In my first term, I had half of Boone County. They call it the northern half.
Uh-huh.
And Pat Patterson had the southern half. Then after reapportionment, I think we had parts of 4 in here. My district was cut way down, much smaller. And I noticed a big change in the legislature then between the city. The people from your metropolitan areas, heavily populated areas, are almost all the same, and it's from the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And out in the county, out in the country, it's different.
Yep.
Completely different.
You, when you think of campaigning at that point in time in the mid-'60s, how much money did you have to raise?
I think the first time I ran, I raised a little under $4,000
for a state rep, and now they're easily over $100,000.
Oh man, $250,000.
Yeah.
Oh sure. I mean, it's ridiculous when you see what they're running for, how much they're paid, and everything, and the amount of money spent. And I firmly feel that money controls elections now. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. If you don't have the wherewithal and the money, you just forget it. You can't even start.
Did you get out of it because you got a better job, or because you lost an election, or you just decided I no longer want to do this?
David, I was a structural engineer. I had my own office. And there's one thing that a structural engineer can't do. He can't do any work when he's over in the legislature. And my income went steadily down for 4 straight years. And I never had any difficulty in elections, either in the primaries or the general. And I'm not saying I would win. I don't know. You don't know that. But it just got to a point where I couldn't do both.
It's a huge sacrifice.
Oh yeah. I think at that time, a lot of the people over there were sacrificing. If you, I know of several where their companies were make up the difference in the salaries so they could serve over here. And when I first went in the legislature, our pay was $4,800 a year. Well, I was making a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And then my final term, the pay was $8,400. They raised it, and I'm not so sure it did any good because it still wasn't enough.
We have about a minute left. I want to first of all thank you for joining us, and then I want to say, what do you attribute your good health to? You're 87 years old, and you are really in good health. Is it growing your own vegetables and food, or what? What is it?
Well, some of it's genes. My father lived to be 92. I work hard. I still cut all my own firewood, and we burn 4 or 5 cords a year. I still run a chainsaw practically every day in the wintertime, some. I've cut down on my civic activities a great deal. I've served on a lot of building committees and boards and everything in the county and the city. I'm a 60-year Kiwanian. I do not attend Kiwanis meetings anymore.
Yeah.
I joined the American Legion in 1946, and I was past commander, but I'm not active there anymore. I volunteer at the VA hospital 8 hours every Wednesday, moving patients in wheelchairs, beds, and carts. Been doing that since 1991. I have a big garden at home. It was 80 by 40, now it's 40 by 40, yeah. And we raise all our own vegetables. My doctors tell me that just keep doing what I'm doing, and keep at it. And